Hi, everybody. Welcome to the latest episode of Writers Showcase. I am your host, Jennifer Ann Gordon, the award-winning author of Beautiful, Frightening, and Silent, as well as the Hotel series and the upcoming novel Pretty Ugly, which is going to be released July 13th. With me today is multi-genre author Kristine Raymond. Kristine, welcome to Writer Showcase.
Thanks so much for having me, Jennifer. Hi, everyone. I'm excited about
Hey.
this.
It'll be fun. Kristine, I just realized my camera was crooked. Let's have you tell our viewers a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your work.
Sure. Well, I live in the very hot and humid South Central Kentucky, and I whine about that every chance I get, even though I swore back in April when it was really nice out that I wouldn't. But yep, I do. And I have multiple fur babies that I take care of, and I garden, and I, kind of make time for my husband every once in a while. You know how that is when you have a garden and multiple fur babies and writing.
And when you're a writer, so most of the
Yeah,
time you're just like in a room with the door closed, and then
exactly,
you just burst out
exactly.
of that room every once in a while for food, and all you want to talk about is your book, and they're like, I haven't seen you in a week.
I know, I know. Honestly, my husband is really great though, because when I have hit a spot where I'm really not sure what'll happen, I'll sit and I'll tell him what's going on in the book and this character and that character and this and that. And he just listens to me. He doesn't
Yes.
have to say a word, but just talking it out, all of a sudden I go, oh, wait, that's what I'm going to do. Thanks so
I
much, honey. And then I
I
run back
love
into my
that.
office.
I have a similar relationship to my husband, and the same thing happened over the weekend. I was a little bit like boggled with
Yeah.
something. I'm like, how do I get to the end? And I just like, we were at the lake. He was trying to relax, and I just like blurbed it all at him because it's a project I'm not really supposed to talk about. So it's like super secretive, but I can tell him.
Right.
And it helped so much. And the same
It
thing,
does.
he didn't say anything. He didn't try to give advice or be like, what
Yep.
I would do is this. And it really helped me figure out at least where to go next for the
It
time
does.
being.
It's one of those crazy things because if I talk to my dog and try to do that, or I just talk to myself out loud, it doesn't work. Has to be with another human being.
Yeah.
And like you said, because I'm the same way, I don't reveal anything about my work before it's ready. I mean, I may say the title or what I'm working on, but he's the only one that I can really like say, okay, so this, because here's the thing, he doesn't read my books, and I'm okay with
Um,
that. He's
okay.
he's not a big reader, so that was an understanding we came to early on. So I'm not going to ruin anything by telling him, here's this spoiler, and this
I
is what
know.
I want to have
Here's the
happen, and
end.
all of that. Yeah, and this is how it ends, and this person's getting killed off, and so it's so freeing to be able to do that.
Yeah. I
And
always love, oh, sorry, when you get somebody who understands you as a person so well. So that way, when you say things that are like really off the wall. So I know you like mysteries and thrillers and stuff like that, and you're
yeah,
you're you're writing in that genre from time to time,
yeah,
and probably leaning more towards that in the future. And mystery, thriller, horror, all of that. Sometimes you say and have to write really screwed up things.
yeah.
So it's good to be able to like bounce those ideas off the person who loves you. And if they don't make a face like that's too much,
I
then
know.
then it's fine.
Right. Exactly. Like I'm going to torture this person and pull out their you know thumb hairs one by one. And yeah, yeah, okay. And then I'm gonna have them step on a kitten accidentally. Oh no, no, don't do
I
that.
know. I have like this part in my current work in progress that does involve an animal, and I'm like, oh, I hate doing this, but it just
I know.
sometimes it needs to be done. It's off
It does.
screen, you don't see it. It's but there's a description of, oh, there's a blankety blank animal and it's in two pieces, and where's the head?
Oh,
It's like one of those things.
oh yeah.
One of those lighthearted things. And I always just want to tell people like, I'm a vegetarian, I love animals.
I
Are
am too. I'm a
you?
vegetarian too. Yes,
Yes.
I am.
Is that hard to be a vegetarian in Kentucky? Because I lived in Ohio and it was pretty hard to be a vegetarian there. I
To
feel like
to
people
eat
tried to put
out,
bacon and everything. Yeah.
to go eat out, yes.
Yeah.
Honestly, my if my husband and I are going to go eat out somewhere, we go someplace that has Italian where I can either get pizza or just plain pasta sauce kind of thing. But as far as being a vegetarian just on its own, no, not at all.
Yeah, that's easy.
I went cold turkey and I never looked back. Now, I say vegetarian. The past couple of years, I became a pescatarian because I have added shrimp back to my diet occasionally. That is the one thing that I really missed. But it's kind of like I'll have shrimp once every 4 or 5 months.
Oh, wow.
So it's mainly vegetarian.
Yeah. I'm a vegetarian. I've dabbled with the idea of going vegan, but I love cheese so much.
Cheese and butter, I cannot.
I know.
Now
I was like,
drink
what if
plant-based milk? I'm fine with plant-based milk, but
I drink coconut milk.
yeah.
But like the idea of like weird yogurt or that cheese that doesn't melt, I just can't do it.
I can't give up cheese. I tried. I did go vegan for a little while, and I bought all of the plant-based cheeses and stuff, and yeah, it's not the same. There are some things that I don't mind eating as a vegetarian, but there are other things that no, it's not the same. I need real butter and I need real cheese. And I love eggs. So, you know, it couldn't have eggs or honey if I was vegan. So
I know. And then all of a sudden you're like, is it worth it to be vegan? You know, my vegan friends are like probably listening to this going, yes, it's worth it to be vegan. And I'm like selfishly saying, but cheese, I can't give it up. Especially like we've all had a hard year with this pandemic. Like, had I tried to give up cheese mid-pandemic, I feel like my family would have been murdered.
Over the edge.
Yes.
That would be it. I know.
So you have just recently released. It's a novel of 4 novellas, Seasons of Love. Is that what it is? Is it 4 novellas or 4 shorts?
Yeah, 4 short stories in one collection, Seasons of Love. And it actually came out a few years ago, but I love that book so much that I'm really trying to hype it up. It's a great beach read or poolside read or lounging, you know, in the lounge chair in the summer kind of read. So Seasons of Love is 4 short, seasonally themed short stories, which starts with dogwoods in springtime. And what I love best about this is that each story, the character, at least one character, sometimes 2 in each story, interacts with the characters in the other stories. So there's some sort of connection, and it kind of goes full circle. So Dogwoods in Springtime is about a widow who finds a second chance of love, and they all are happily ever after romances.
I think they have to be, don't they, in order to be called
a romance? Yeah.
Instead of a love story. Like right. A love story can end in death.
Tragedy. Yeah. Yeah, romance is a happily ever after. But I always like to make sure that readers know that, because the 4 different stories, I don't want to say they're different genres because they are all romance, but like I said, Dogwoods in Springtime is second chance. Seashells in Summer is about a single mom. Aspens in Autumn is more the romantic suspense. It's about a woman who witnesses a murder and then goes on the run. And then
you had me at murder.
Snowflakes in Winter is about a kind of an insta-love sort of romance, but it also has a stalker in it. So
yes,
I wrote them just how I felt them when I was writing the stories, and it was really nice not to kind of feel like I had to stay with, you know, well, it's a romantic suspense book, so I have to write all 4 as romantic suspense or whatever. I got to kind of play around with it a little bit.
I like that a lot. So you have a ton of work out. Like you are very prolific. How many books do you put out a year?
It varies. I have 16 books to date published. I started writing in September 2013. So I published my first book that year, November. Yeah. That's the Hidden Springs series, the first in the Hidden Springs series, which is historical Western romance. And there are 9 books in that series, but there is going to be a 10th coming, even though I said I was stopping at 8. One thing this has taught me is to never say never. I don't say that anymore. I leave it open. There's Seasons of Love. There's the Celebration series, which are you can either buy as a box set or individually, and those are 3 contemporary romances. And I will tease that somewhere down the line there will be a 4th in that, with those stories.
Wow.
And
So
then
I love the idea of series so much. I have like a 2-book series, and then I was just like, no, I can't do any more. And now I'm like, oh, I think I have like 1 or 2 more books in that series that I could definitely write. I'm sorry I cut you off, and we'll get
no,
back
you're
to
fine.
that, but I got so
You're
excited. When you
fine.
went into it, did you know that you were writing a series, or did you think I'm writing 1 book and then couldn't give up the characters, or the fans said you can't give up these characters?
With Hidden Springs, when I first began writing, I did not have ambitions to be an author. It wasn't a lifelong dream, wasn't on my radar at all, not something I ever thought about. And then in 2013, a girl I worked with had started self-publishing her books, and she was telling me about the process, and I thought, that sounds really interesting. And I came home and I told my husband, I'm going to write a book because I can self-publish it. He's like, okay, go ahead. So I did. And I thought it was going to be 1 book. That's what I intended. As I was writing Here to Stay, and I wasn't very far into it because I started bringing in, the minor characters, your secondary characters.
Yeah.
I thought, ooh, well, he needs a story and she needs a story.
Yes.
So that became books 2 and 3. But by the time I was writing the 3rd book, it's like, okay, 5 more stories for 5 more characters came into play. And that's when I said I was stopping at 8 books. It's just going to be an 8-book series. And in 2018, 19, somewhere in there, when I was working on Finagled, my cozy mystery, the idea for another Hidden Springs book. Now I had done the eight book series had been done for years. And this, not even a secondary character, but just someone who had a couple of cameos in the other books, he popped into my head and said, you're going to write a story about me. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm working on my cozy mystery. Yep. And he said, no, you're not. You're going to write a story about me. And I ended up writing the novella Enduring Traditions as the 9th book. Thought that's where it was going to end. And then this year I kind of started getting the idea for another character. And so there will be a 9th or a 10th book. And yeah. And
I love it when the characters just like get in your head and they're like, you're writing
story.
You're writing my story. I think non-writers don't understand that, how you can be like, can you shut up? I'm in the middle of something else. I am focused on this project. And they're like, but wouldn't it be crazy if people knew my secrets? And you're like, get out of here. Get out of here, side character from a series that's done.
I know. And they're real people. I mean, they may live up here, but they are real people. And that's the thing. I get asked a lot, well, how do you come up with your ideas? And it's not so much that I sit and think about them. I don't sit and say, okay, let me think of an idea for a new book. Stuff just pops into my head all the time. I mean, it's like constant boom, 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 boom. And sometimes something sticks and it's like, wow, okay, that would make a great story. Let me write down that idea. Or this character's coming back. Let me write that down. And the characters, a lot of times I kind of equate it to, I'm not writing their story. They're telling me their story and I'm transcribing it.
Yeah. I think
like they tell me what to do and what to write.
And don't you hate it when they tell you something that you disagree with, when you're like, that is the wrong thing to do?
Yes.
And you're typing it and screaming. Yeah.
I'm more a pantser than a plotter. I don't plot out anything in my life, really.
I'm always like, I don't know the end.
Well, for me though, when I go into a story, I know the beginning. I know the main characters. I know what I want to have happen in the story, like the general plot line, like what it's going to be
about. I think that's called a plantser now, like where you have like a tiny bit of a plan, but no outline.
And then I usually know the ending or how I want it to end, and it rarely ends that way because as I'm writing the book, it takes on a life of its own, and the characters say, just like you said, no, I'm not going to have that happen.
Yeah.
I want this to happen. And sometimes it surprises me, and sometimes it's like, oh, wow, that's so much better than what I thought up, even though I did
Exactly.
think it up, but it's still so much better.
I know. I love it when that happens. The book I'm writing right now that I can't like talk about, I I had three other books in mind that I'm like, these are the books that I've like they've like been in my head for a while. I'm going to write one of these. I'm going to write one of these. And then in a conversation with a friend, I said, you know what would be probably like a great selling book is it would blah blah blah. And I like as a joke came up with this like title and a concept. And she said, I that sounds like a good book actually. And I'm like, I know, right? Ha ha. And
Yeah.
then like a few days later I was like, why do I keep thinking about this joke? Like I made a joke. And then I sat down with my agent and I pitched her a bunch of ideas. That was the one she went, that. I'm like, I don't have it fleshed out at all. I don't have really anything, but I have a concept and I think I know who the main character is. And she was like, write it.
Yep. Yep. It's so amazing how that works. And all these years later, it still just kind of blows my mind that that's how my brain works and that's how other people's brains work. And it just, I'm still just in awe of that whole process.
Yes.
Now, you asked me if readers had suggested any follow-up books, and I will tell you a story. So, By Dawn's Early Light, which is the first book in the Celebration series, was written for an anthology, and it was one of the limited edition anthologies. So once that came down and we got our rights back, I put it out just as a standalone, and that's what it was going to be, a standalone. And one of my readers, who has since become a beta reader, hi Barbara, she hounded me for years to write more in that series, like to write the series. And I kept telling her, it's a standalone. I'm not writing anymore. It's one and done. And she would, every so often, she'd bring it up. You know, you really need to write another book in Celebration. I'm like, no. And it was several years later, and all of a sudden, two other characters who were in the first book, I'm like, you know, I could write their stories. And sure enough, it became a trilogy. And as I said, now there's going to be somewhere down the line a fourth book. But it was because she kept sowing that seed or watering. Like she planted it and then she'd come by every once in a while and water
and check on it. Yeah.
And
prune the bad stuff away.
Yeah. And so that became Reservations for Two and Under the Mistletoe. So yeah. So I have those. I have an erotic drama. I have a cozy mystery. I'm all over the place.
But we were talking before the show, and you said the thing that you're drawn to the most in probably just like in your reading life, maybe, is like thriller, mystery, suspense. Yeah. So, and so are you working on something in that kind of area at the moment?
Yeah,
I know we don't want to talk too much about.
Well, I can talk about this. So in 2019, I was really sick of writing romance. I'd had enough of it. I needed a break.
I just want to kill one of these characters.
Well, yeah, that's kind of where I was getting. So I decided I was going to write a thriller. I have some ideas, and that was the time. And I sat down, and I wasn't even like 3 pages in, and it's like, this isn't a thriller. This is a cozy mystery. Now, I'd never written a cozy mystery and I'd never read a cozy mystery, but I knew kind of like what the guidelines were.
Yeah.
And that's when I wrote Finagled. And so right now I'm working on the second book in that series. It's going to be a series. I have I think 26, 27, 28 titles planned out because they're all a play on the word fin. So Finicky Eaters is what I'm working on now. So I'm doing cozy. I do still want to write. I have a thriller trilogy planned out. And that one I can pretty definitely say will just be a trilogy. Don't know when I'm going to write it.
I know, but that's
sort of planned out.
When you have 27 other titles.
Yeah. And then I have a couple of thriller standalones. And, I'll be going back to the historical romance and writing another Hidden Springs book. So. Yeah. So
what is it about like thriller, suspense, mystery that like gets you all fired up? Because that's one of my favorite things to read, even though I typically write in the horror space right now. But Like, I just know it's only a matter of time before I'm like writing something about a serial killer.
I always like kind of the psychological aspect of it. Like, I used to read a lot of true crime when I was in my late teens. And perfect time to read true crime,
I
when
feel
you're
like that is when
19.
we all start
Yeah.
reading it, when it's like, I'm very hormonal and crazy right now. I'm 17 and a half. I'm going to read Helter Skelter.
Right.
And then it's just slippery slope into all I want to read about is serial killers
But
or
for me,
cults.
it was, it fascinates me what makes some people's brains work differently than others. Like, it's the whole psychological aspect. And while I like romance, and I have quite a few, romantic novels on my shelf. I have Kathleen Woodward's and Sandra Brown, and both her early and her later stuff, because she started out like romance, and now she's more romantic suspense. And, I have nothing against romance, but I like having that little edge in a story. I mean, yeah. So I read a lot of, I read PJ Tracy and the Kellermans, both Jonathan and Faye, and I just, I don't know. I don't know how to explain it. It's kind of just that when you pick up that book and your heart starts beating a little faster, and it's like, yes, this is the one. And that's what I want to write, and be able to have readers pick up one of my thrillers and go, oh yeah, this is the one.
This is the one that you literally start like late afternoon and you stay up all night and you don't put it down. That's, that is such a hope that every writer wants to have, that book that people say, I actually read this in one sitting.
Yes.
And when you think about it as a reader, I know me, there's very few books in my life that I've legitimately read in one sitting. Like, stayed up all night.
I prefer to read in one sitting. If not one sitting, then two. My greatest indulgence is to read a book cover to cover with no interruptions.
Yeah.
I love doing that. PJ Tracy is one that I can stay up in the middle of the night and read. I know better now that I'm older and I need more sleep, that I need to start her books earlier in the day.
I feel like that's been the big problem with like one sit reads the older I get. I feel like it used to be I could do it no problem, and now like in the past 10 years I'm like, I've only done that 3 times because I am exhausted for like a week and a half after that.
Yeah, I know.
Like, you don't bounce back with just an afternoon nap the next day anymore. It's just like, it's like you've been on vacation, or like you have terrible jet lag and it takes a week to get back on schedule just because you're like, I stayed up all night reading one book.
Gone are the days of going to sleep at 2 a.m. and waking up at 6 a.m. bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and ready to take on the day. I can't
even remember that version of me, but I know she existed. I remember when I used to consider myself a night owl, when I was just like, would stay up and get up early and do things like work out at 6 a.m. I'm like, after going to bed at 2? No, can't do it anymore.
I know.
Sad and old. But yeah, no, I understand that whole like, oh, here's this great book that I've been looking forward to for so long. I want to read it in one sitting. And now I plan like, okay, it's Sunday at 1 p.m. I'll start reading now. And hopefully I can get it.
Recent book, and this was actually a couple of years ago, that I read cover to cover like that really, I mean, I could not put it down, was Don Hosmer's Bits and Pieces. I absolutely love that book. That book was one that I read the last page and I immediately wanted to start it over. It was
that.
It was that good. And I just found out she's writing a sequel.
Don't you love that?
Yes.
I think the last 2 books that I did like read nonstop it was Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay, which was really incredible. It was one of the few books that I finished and then immediately looked at my husband and said, you need to start reading this right now. So that, and Bird Box by Josh Malerman, I read in one sitting and did the same thing. I also read The Chain, but I can't remember the author of The Chain, but that was another one sit read where I was just like, I can't put it down.
And what's really bad, I don't know if you're a Harry Potter reader or were in the past, but
I'm not, but
I really got into those books. And what's really bad is is it the last one, I think, that with the Deathly Hallows, that thing was so long, like there was no way I could sit and read it in one sitting. I just couldn't. I
you
could
just
not
can't.
physically stay still that long and
I know
read
you
for
would get a
that long.
blood
Because the
clot
book's like this thick. It's like, the War and Peace of
of fantasy.
fantasy. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really, I think that's why there's like that great sweet spot with suspense novels of like how long it is. It's like
Yeah.
90,000 to 115,000 words is a good, hefty, but good one sit read. The second we get up around 150,000 words and we're like 600 pages, 700 pages, you're like, I'm going to like do damage to my body if I just sit here and read this whole thing as
I
much as
know.
I want to.
Now, I don't know for you if you're this way. I've talked to other authors who some are like this. When I read a book, for me, it's like I'm watching a movie. Like
Yeah.
that's how it plays out in my head. So that's why I don't like stopping, because I don't watch 3/4 of a movie and then come back to it the next day.
Yeah.
I watch the whole thing. So while I'm reading and those images are streaming through my head, it's like I don't want to stop.
Is it that way when you write too? So when I write, I am writing the movie that's playing in my head or the TV show that's playing in my head.
Yes and no. It kind of does, but I've tried to break myself of this, and I've just embraced that this is who I am. I get really tripped up by misspellings, and I am not somebody who can just write and just get it all out on the page and then go back and fix it.
Yeah, so my other show is called Vox Vomitus, which means word vomit, and it's based on that. It's based on like that first draft where you just have to say like, screw it, I don't care about the mistakes.
Yep.
I'll deal with them later. It's hard to get to that point,
I can't
especially when you see the red squiggly line and you're like, oh, gotta go back and fix that.
I have tried. I have, yeah, it's just not in my makeup. I cannot do it. And it's not even so much even necessarily misspellings or poor grammar or anything like that. It's if I write a sentence and it's not, it conveys what I want to say, but it's not exactly how I want to say it. I can spend 20 minutes on one sentence, and until it is what I want it to be, I cannot move on. I mean, it's almost like it's something physical that will not let me move on. I've tried. I've when I say I tried, I mean, I've actually said, okay, I'm just going to leave it there and I'm going to go to the next thing and write. And I keep getting pulled back into it. Even chapters. I try to skip ahead chapters.
I can't do that.
Because if it's not perfect, and I'm using the word perfect loosely, but if it doesn't say what I want it to say here, I can't say the next thing.
So I understand that. I always feel like it's like singing. Like if you're singing and you're messing up a note repeatedly, it's not usually that note that you're having a problem with. It's what came before it. So I feel like when I'm writing and if I get like bogged down in something, I'm like, let me go to right before it and figure out the problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I do try to keep moving forward as much as I can. It's difficult, but I do have to write in order. I can't skip chapters. I can't skip scenes.
Yep.
And
same here.
I know I've talked to people and I'm like, well, I know what happens like 2 scenes from now, but I don't know how to get there. And people just say, well, just write what you know and then fill in the rest later. And I'm like, my brain doesn't do that.
Exactly. Well, because sometimes you'll write that scene, but then how you get there changes that scene.
Yes.
So then when you're going back and you're filling in the blanks, now that scene that you wrote doesn't work, which means the rest of what you wrote doesn't work. Yeah.
Yeah.
I give credit to authors who can jump around, who can just kind of, fill in here and there and there. I wish that I could. I really do, but it creates so much anxiety in me when I skip or try to move on. I mean the anxiety is not worth saving that 20 minutes to
that it
takes me. And I think that's a really important thing for authors to understand. And a lot of new authors, first time authors, I should say, tend to think that they're supposed to write a certain way. And I think it's so important to trust your instinct. Trust how your mind, how your body, how your heart, how your soul, trust how it's telling you to write.
And also
And
trust that it
and
might
yes,
be different per project. Like the next time you write
yes,
a
and it
book, it might be like, oh, for this one, I somehow an outline works.
right. And you're right about that, because I do write differently with each story. And part of that is because I learn as I go. I learn that, okay, I can do this a little bit differently so I can apply that to the next story. But right, exactly how you're telling the story or even what genre it's in, maybe you can take a little shortcut or you can skip a chapter or whatever. But I really think as much great advice that there is out there, and there is a lot of advice out there, and everyone has an opinion, including me, on how you should write. I still say the most important thing is you soak it all in, you listen, you be open, because you never know when you're gonna hear something that goes, wow, I never thought of trying that, let me see if
Yeah.
that works. But what it basically comes down to is just trust yourself and trust your own process.
Yeah.
I just think that's so important. And I hate when I see first time authors, or even, authors that have been doing this for a while, that they get so caught up in the how should I be writing. It
Yeah.
really is just write. Just
And
write however it
just right.
feels.
And
Yeah.
and I've talked to so many people over the years, and being, a podcast host and just like knowing other authors, people who get really, really bogged down in the neuroses of writer's block.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm blocked, I'm not doing it. And I always just tell people, I'm like, writing isn't always physically writing. Sometimes it is staring at a blank screen and letting
Yeah.
your brain get to where it needs to
Percolate.
be. Yeah.
If things need to percolate, and sometimes they percolate in 15 minutes and sometimes they percolate in 15 months.
Yeah.
I mean, Tempted took me 4 years to write. Now, that wasn't working on it consistently, but it took that long for the ideas to come together to be something. I'd work on a little bit here, a little bit there. Here to Stay, my first book. Now, granted, I had no idea what I was doing, but that took me
It's always
18
easier.
that took me 18 days,
Oh
because
my
I just
gosh.
sat down, and now it wasn't ready to be published, but it just 18 days I sat and got that whole story out. And it was like,
See.
wow, I did this in 18 days. Wouldn't it be great? Look at how many books I can get out if I can do this all the time. Yeah, it didn't work that way. I've been working on Finicky Eaters for 2 years on and off, because it's for me, creativity is not something that you can flip on and off. It's not like hitting a light switch. And I
And,
can
and
try
I
to,
think this past year, it's like we've all been dealing with like a lot of stuff.
yeah,
And when the pandemic first hit, I think writers everywhere went, I finally have all the time in the world to write. And then we
yeah,
sat there and all had like a universal panic attack
yeah.
of, I have all this time to write, but I'm scared all the time. How do I
There,
write?
that was it. There was so much negative atmospheric stuff that was bombarding us. Like, no matter how the pandemic affected you and is still affecting you, for some people, and I'm one of them. For me, I lived exactly how I always lived. The only difference was that I wore a mask when I went out, but I don't go out much. I like to stay in at my little space, and I don't interact much with other people, and I'm happy that way. I mean, the pandemic actually finally gave me like a legitimate excuse not to have to go out. So
I
for me, my day to day didn't change much, but I still couldn't escape just the negativity that was just in the atmosphere, that was just
yeah,
out there. And I
it was
think
like a universal panic.
it was. And I think that just, I think that contributed to it. But I also feel that my story is not ready to be told yet. There was a part of Finicky Eaters that I figured out just like a month and a half ago that had not even occurred to me over the past 2 years. But it's a pivotal part of the story now. It's like, wow, that made such a difference.
Isn't that amazing? I love that
Yeah,
moment when you're
yeah,
just like, how did I think of this story before that? When
Exactly.
this is like the whole crux of it.
And the thing is, I wasn't even consciously thinking of that at that moment when it hit me.
I love that
And
even more.
that's the kind of thing where I say that the story just isn't ready to be told yet, because I could have sat down and forced a story
Yep.
that I wouldn't have liked, and got it down on paper and put it out there, and readers wouldn't have liked it because I didn't like it. Or I can just sit and say, okay, you know what? It's not happening right now. I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
And then, 15 months later, boom, oh wow, that's what it needed.
So are you able to, you're working on Finicky Eaters for 15 months. Are you able to work on other projects during that? Or are you, because I am very bad at project hopping. I can take a break from something and write something, but I can't. I've talked to writers who are like, oh, I do my romance writing in the morning, and then at night I
Yeah.
write my suspense novels. And I'm like, I couldn't do that. Can you?
No, not at all.
Okay.
And
I was like,
yeah,
can you tell me how to do that?
I know authors that do that too, where it's like, okay, 1,000 words on this story and 1,500 words on this one, and then I take a break for lunch. No, I can I can only work on one project at a time. However, if, like in the case of Finicky Eaters, where it's not really coming to me, or I'll go back to Tempted and use that, because that took 4 years and I wrote other books in between that.
Mhm.
But it was because it sort of fizzled to the point where I had no idea what was coming next. And it's like, okay, it's, I don't want to say that it was like dead in the water, but it was just kind
It
of
was
like it just
paused.
really, yeah, it was a big pause. It was like you hit pause and then the screen goes black because you kept it on pause for so long.
Yeah.
And in that case, yes, I could write other books and get other books out. And then I would have a moment where, because in the background my brain was constantly thinking about it, even if I wasn't aware of it, and then something would come to me and it'd be like, oh wow, I need to get back to Tempted and write something else. And then there would be a long pause again. And you would ask me, how many books I put out a year. I think in 2014 I put out 4, maybe 5, something like that.
That sounds exhausting.
And then and then I haven't put out a book since 2019 now. So
okay.
it just
So
really,
it balances
yeah,
out.
it does. It does. And I think that was because I was really concentrating on Hidden Springs at that time. So I was kind of like one after the other. And then I had started writing Celebration series and all of that. So I think my average is about, it would average to maybe about two a year.
And that's like a reasonable amount. I put out 3 last year and everybody thought, oh my gosh, you write so fast. And I'm like, no, I don't, because the first book took 20 years and then 2 months of actual writing. The 2 second books, like the second and third book, were actually one book that I just chopped in half and published as 2 different books.
Right.
Because I couldn't decide on a cover that would represent the entire story or a title that would represent the entire story, because there's a definite like point in my hotel series where things shift. So I'm like, I'll just make it 2 books. Easy.
Easy is famous last word when it comes to books. Yeah. Well, okay, so let me ask you about titles. So for me, the title is as important as the story.
Yes.
Like it is as much a part of the story as the characters are. Do you find that too?
I do. I will say my first novel, my second novel, which I thought was just going to be a second novel, but it ended up being a second and third. My book I have coming out next month called Pretty Ugly, and the book I'm not allowed to talk about, the title came first for all of them.
Oh, wow.
Actually, maybe not the first novel, but it came very early on that I understood what that title should be. But I feel like what I'm writing right now started with a title, and then I figured out the plot after that. Because I was like, oh, there should be a book called Blah. And then I'm like, oh, what would that be?
For the most part, my titles have come first. It's difficult for me to write a story that doesn't have a title, and I don't know why.
I mean,
I
no, I understand that. Like even a short story, like I just wrote a short story and I thought of the title first and was able to, it kind of was the theme to the
yeah.
entire piece.
Now I did change the title of the 8th Hidden Springs book. Originally it was going to be Law of Attraction, which worked. But the closer I got, and I had announced that title early on because I did a Christmas card that had the titles of all the 8 books that
Oh,
I gave out, even though it was still years before that book would be released. And the closer I got to it, it's like, yeah, that just doesn't really
yeah.
work. And I really didn't know what I wanted it to be called. And then as I started writing it, I'm still writing it under Law of Attraction. I'm like, yeah, that's just not working. And then it hit me coming home. And it's like, that's it. That's perfect.
I know.
Because at the time, I thought that was going to be the last book. And it's actually about the daughter of the couple that's in the first book. Because Hidden Springs is a sequential series. So it spans, well, at this point, I think it spans like 37 years, something like that.
Wow.
So, yeah. So I thought, oh, coming home, kind of, go all the way around. And
Yes.
it's perfect. And then I had to write a 9th book, and now it's done.
I know. Oh, Kristine, you've been so much fun. I hate to say that we are out of time. Oh, are you frozen?
This has been fun. Thanks so much for having me on.
You are awesome. Everybody who's watching this live or who is going to be watching it on the replay, or if you're just going to be listening to the audio, KristineRaymond.com has your website's beautiful, by the way. I was staring at it for a while and just like, oh, wow, this is really gorgeous.
Thank you.
Bravo. Go to her website. It's beautiful, well organized, amazing. Check out her work. Kristine, I hope we get to talk again sometime soon. I adored this.
Absolutely.
I feel like we're like simpatico. I also live someplace that's very gross and humid. I live in New Hampshire, which shouldn't be gross and humid, but it's stinking disgusting at this time of year.
Well, New Hampshire is a place that's very close to my heart, and it's actually the location in Aspen or Snowflakes in winter. Because we used to vacation when I was a kid. We used to vacation in the White Mountains. Yeah.
Oh, I just got chills all over. I'm like, oh, maybe the interview's not done. I love that. Yeah, normally I say New Hampshire. I'm in Concord, or just outside of Concord. Concord's a state capital.
We used to be. My parents owned property up in Lyman. So
nice.
Up past Franconia Notch.
Franconia Notch.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. I was so sad when Old Man of the Mountain collapsed.
That
just
happened.
Broke my heart.
I moved out of New Hampshire, and the first time, I big permanent move to the Midwest, and then the Old Man of the Mountain collapsed, and I was just like,
it was
how did this happen? It was, but that happened, and then the Red Sox won the World Series, so everything. I'm like, what's happening to New England now that I'm gone? Such a narcissist. I'm like, this has to do with me.
Oh, I know.
Oh my gosh. Well, I love that you've been to New Hampshire, and
I love it. It's been a long time since I've been back, but it will always just really hold a special place in my heart.
So you understand our weird, humid summers. And the black flies and the mosquitoes that are the size of your palm. The black flies.
Well, that's the mosquitoes in Kentucky here too this summer. But people never understood being in the woods, how it could be humid in the woods. It's it can be. It's
And the black flies are so huge.
Oh, the black flies were awful. But
oh gosh. And so anyways, I'm like, thank you everybody for listening to us talk about New Hampshire's bugs. Told you the show would be casual. Oh, thank you, Kristine. I also want to thank Creative Edge Publicity for being the sponsor of this show. I want to thank Pam Stack and everybody at the Global Authors on the Air Radio Network. This is a copywritten podcast by the Global Authors on the Air Radio Network. Also, shout out to my husband, Roman, our producer. Thank you for keeping us looking good. And that's about it. I'll see all of you next week.
Thanks.
Bye.